Yeah, I was wondering if I could book my dog in for the vet so I can have a discussion. It's Couzens, Couzens.
It's March 2021, and Wayne Couzens, a police officer, was on the phone to his vet, making an appointment for his pet bulldog, Maddie. From the tone of his voice, it is impossible to tell that he had just set fire to the body of Sarah Everard. Sarah, a 33-year-old marketing executive, had been abducted by Couzens in South London 2 days earlier. Shortly after coming off the phone, Couzens returned to Hodes Wood in Kent, where he transferred Sarah's burnt remains into a builder's bag, lugged it across to a pond and dumped it in the water.
So we're here to talk to you about Sarah. I'll show you a picture. Do you know Sarah?
I don't know.
Okay. Sarah went missing. I'll show you some pictures of her on the day.
Okay.
Sarah went missing on Wednesday, and her parents obviously and her family are really worried about her. The inquiry that's been conducted so far has led us to come and speak to you about it and to see what you know about Sarah, okay? So, would you like to, do you know where Sarah is?
No.
Right.
That was a lie. Wayne Couzens was actually the only person in Britain who knew where Sarah Everard was. He had abducted her, raped her, and then tried to destroy her body. But how can some people suddenly switch from affable family man to monster?
So when we look at Wayne Couzens and his behaviour after he'd carried out his horrific crimes and how emotionally detached he was from what he did, to me this just screams of a few specific character traits. So he's got an absolute lack of empathy, a lack of remorse. You could even argue that he's got a lack of fear. It would be expected, should we say, that most people who did do something like that would be petrified themselves. They'd be really frightened. They'd be worried about being caught. They'd be hyperactive, hypersensitive. But Wayne Couzens was none of those things. He seemed very calm and collected. So to me, this indicates a possibility of a personality disorder, such as antisocial personality disorder.
On the evening of the 3rd of March 2021, Sarah had popped over to a friend's house in South London, shared a meal and some wine, and then set off to walk home. She spoke to her boyfriend on her mobile phone and was described as being in good spirits. Several CCTV cameras captured her as she was walking through the largely deserted streets. Technically, she was in breach of the coronavirus lockdown for visiting her friend. But there was no way Couzens could have known where she had been when he stopped her in Poinders Road, not far from Clapham Common. Couzens drove around central and south London for some time that evening before he eventually found and spotted Sarah, and then he put into action his ghastly plan. The Old Bailey was later shown dashcam footage from passing cars, which showed a woman talking to a man on the pavement, not far from a white Vauxhall Crossland car, which had pulled over onto the curb. So this is the point at which Wayne Couzens stops Sarah Everard. He pulls his car over here, and she was walking up here, and he gets out of the car, shows her his police warrant card, and presumably starts questioning her about where she's been. It's in the middle of the lockdown, and he's fully au fait with all the lockdown guidelines, where you should be, why you shouldn't be out, etc. She wasn't gullible. She was, an intelligent woman, but he was obviously very, very persuasive. Convinced her that she'd committed a crime, and made her get to the back of his car. And then even handcuffed her so that she was in the back of his car, incapacitated, while he drove off. She would have been absolutely terrified by the time he pulled up in the Kent port of Dover around 11:30 p.m. Sarah was manhandled from the Vauxhall hire car into Couzens' own vehicle, a Seat, and then driven into the woods in the middle of the night. Couzens later admitted raping and murdering Sarah, but he has never gone into detail about her ordeal.
From my theoretical psychoanalysis of Wayne Couzens without having the benefit of assessing him in person, there's no evidence to suggest that he had any severe mental illness. He had no history, never, as far as we know, been seen by a psychiatrist, never sectioned, for example. But what he did clearly was horrendous, horrific. The outcome of killing a complete random stranger is possibly one of the worst types of crimes you can commit. So it does look, using the mad and bad framework, that he was bad as opposed to mad. It does seem as if he was in control of his actions. And I think this is reflected by the very fact that he planned them quite meticulously. He had planned ahead and he was looking for a suitable victim. So to me, this all indicates somebody who knows what they're doing and therefore is not legally insane.
What is known is that Couzens popped into a Costa coffee shop in Dover just after 8 a.m. on the day after Sarah was abducted to buy a hot chocolate with coconut milk and a Bakewell tart. It is presumed Sarah was dead by then. Later, he bought petrol from a garage to set fire to her body, which he had left in an abandoned refrigerator in the woods. He then visited a B&Q store to buy two 220-litre builder's bags, normally used to remove rubble. Sarah was reported missing, and it was quickly apparent she had been a victim of foul play. Within days, detectives had located the moment when she was abducted and traced the hire car back to Couzens. It was a huge shock when they discovered the prime suspect was one of their own.
In February 2020, Couzens joined the Metropolitan Police's Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command and spent most of his time guarding embassies. In fact, the night before the murder, he'd been guarding the US Embassy. And on the night of the murder, he lied to his wife and told her he'd picked up an extra shift guarding the embassy. But in fact, he drove to Dover, he picked up a hire car, and then he drove up to London.
The police were told much later that Couzens had repeatedly exposed himself to McDonald's workers just weeks before he murdered Sarah. A woman employed at a drive-through branch near Swanley in Kent said Couzens repeatedly pulled up to the order hatch with his trousers down. The police faced questions over the handling of these incidents of indecent exposure by Couzens.
Wayne Couzens, in my view, would have what we psychiatrists called a paraphilia, which is like a sexual perversion. What I think is quite interesting in his particular case is because he was a police officer, it looks like complaints against him were not taken particularly seriously. I think they were brushed under the carpet. I think they were dismissed. Now, the danger of that is that if somebody gets away with this kind of behaviour, if there's no repercussions, then it can embolden them to escalate their offending to something far more severe. And it seems like that's what happened in this particular case. But some perversions develop usually during puberty and during adolescence, and it's often related to either one specific incident or a series of incidents that's associated with sexual excitement. So whether that is a person exposing themselves in the past or seeing flashes of somebody naked when they shouldn't, then they kind of internalize that and they become preoccupied with it. So that's part of the puzzle. I think another part of the puzzle is that some people have this like compulsion. So they have these obsessive thoughts about sexuality, about being naked, and whereas that in itself is not that unusual, for these particular people, the thought won't go away, so it's very intrusive, and the only way to relieve it is by doing something impulsive and compulsive, such as exposing themselves.
When detectives arrived at Couzens' home in Deal, a small town in Kent, they still hoped Sarah might be alive. So he was interviewed in his home under special circumstances and without a lawyer.
Usually it'd be in a police station with a solicitor, but because it was what's called an urgent interview, her life was in danger. He was interviewed at his home, and it was simply, where is Sarah? Tell us where she is.
In the videotaped interview, he initially denies having any knowledge of her, and then he tried to blame a Romanian people trafficking gang.
Well, I am in financial shit, and I've been lent on by, I don't know who they are. They're a group, a gang, whatever, and they told me, right, I need to go and pick up girls and get them to them. So I said, not happening, and it then came through that they're going to harm my family, take them away, and they'll use them instead. At that point I had no option to try and find somebody. So I don't, there's a couple of names. I was told a place to take her. That's it. That is all I know.
But his story was full of holes. His black Seat car would offer up dozens of forensic clues linking him to Sarah. Couzens' own blood was found on the back seat, perhaps a sign Sarah had injured him as she struggled desperately for her life. Sarah's blood was found in the boot of the car, as was semen, which was tested and found to contain Couzens' DNA. Couzens was forced to admit he alone had kidnapped, raped and murdered Sarah. The murder triggered a huge public outcry all over the country. To many, the fact that a serving police officer had exploited the government's lockdown laws made it worse. After Couzens was charged, a vigil for Sarah was planned on Clapham Common, but it was in breach of the lockdown restrictions.
The Metropolitan Police's handling was seen as very heavy-handed. Images of male police officers manhandling women protesters at a vigil against male violence, was a very bad look. And there were even calls for the Commissioner, Cressida Dick, to resign. What Couzens did to Sarah was monstrous. It was every woman's worst nightmare.
Sarah's mother, Susan, said she spent her last hours on this earth with the very worst of humanity. Her father, Jeremy, said she was saving to buy a house and looking forward to marriage and children. In October 2021, Couzens was given a whole life sentence, which means he will die in jail. His lawyer said Couzens was filled with self-loathing and shame. He is one of only 75 people serving such a sentence in a British prison.